my 11th event last week. And it's been really interesting to see how all the entrepreneurs, we've had a lot of multinationals, but in Hong Kong we really like to work with the entrepreneurs because they're out finding the asset, the opportunity, the need to really fulfill, and really taking that entrepreneurial spirit to address these issues. And so, in the Entrepreneurship Center and in this crowd, I think that there's opportunities for even more. So, any questions that you would like to kind of take the opportunity to have with any of the 3, 4 panelists? It's okay.
Hello.
A free bottle of water for the first question.
I have a question for Alex in the middle with respect to your real estate development. What happens to the communities? So gentrification, it's a hot, it's kind of a touchy subject in many respects.
Yep.
So what happens to the existing communities after you guys gentrify it? I actually live by Cat Street Gallery, and it is very different than what it used to be when I used to live there 15 years ago.
Yep.
And so I wonder now what happens to these older, families or the communities of elderly people who may no longer be able to afford to live there now.
Is that on? Okay. Yeah, I mean that's a great question. I think the only way to really address that is I mean, I'm not obviously one of those older people who live there, but I can understand that obviously with gentrification comes increase in rents. That's a direct byproduct of what's happening, and but I don't think we're necessarily big enough to make those kind of I suppose effects on those people. I mean, we're really quite a small company, as I said. We had one building down at the end of Hollywood Road. What we're more focused on is actually creating, a neighborhood which people can enjoy in Hong Kong. Hong Kong's a world city. Being a world city, there's certain expectations on the city, and one of those expectations is that it does have certain creative places, certain art galleries, certain restaurants, and so I suppose what we look at doing is providing those kind of a place to provide those kind of services.
And just kind of follow up that, the gentrification, how much are the local residents benefiting once, say, that area of Hollywood Boulevard is going up? Are they seeing a huge increase in their own property values as a result?
Yeah, but I think absolutely they are. But I think that again the question was directed at someone who's renting. Is that right? Well, if they own the place, what we've seen often is that they sell and they move somewhere else, and they take that money and maybe they make a better life for themselves, and they move out of that area. If they're renting, obviously their rent increases. That's a direct byproduct of often of gentrification. But again, I mean, I'm not sure whether. Let's look at Hollywood Road specifically, because you live around there. That's been a combination of many different, I guess, developers, and it hasn't just been us, but we've definitely contributed to it. But it's opened up a new neighborhood, and a neighborhood that a lot of the population can enjoy now. And so, from that perspective, I suppose there's a little bit of give and take.
I think you can press the button.
Is it on? Yeah, this question is for Alessandro. Great chat. I really enjoyed it. What's the benefit for building a LEED certified building for these developers? I mean, is it the feel good factor? And then what is the benefit for companies to go into these LEED certified buildings if the cost is reflected in the rent? Because it seems like, how you explained, there are a lot of extra costs to building these buildings.
Well, there's the extra cost of building the buildings is coming down, which is a trend that we've been seeing. In terms of benefit to the developers, of the 50, almost 60 certified buildings that my company has worked on here in Asia. I would say that probably 2 of them have been because the developer wanted to do the right thing. There is a very, very strong economic motivation for developers to get green building certifications. One of the great moves that the United States Green Building Council, which are the people that developed LEED, what they've done is they've managed this NGO, this nonprofit, as a business. And they've created a value for the LEED brand. And that value is reflected into the increases in building efficiency and value that they can get when the certification is given. What's interesting that's been happening is looking specifically at commercial spaces, because then your second question is, what about the companies that are moving in? What's happening is that the definition of a grade A building now incorporates green building certifications. So while before it was the tallest building, the flashiest building, the building with the best location, all of those now are almost standard. So developers are competing against each other to say, well, what's next? How can I differentiate my building to be a grade A building? And the direction is pointing towards green building certifications. So what we're seeing is not so much that these buildings are more expensive to rent, it's that the buildings that don't have it are coming down, the costs are coming down. So the very definition of a grade A building now in Shanghai and very much here in Hong Kong are ones that have a LEED certification or a BEAM certification. One thing that I didn't mention in my presentation is that now all new construction in Hong Kong must be BEAM certified. So it's very much pushing commercial development in that way. And then also from another view, we have to remember that this is all private market driven. You know, there are some places in the US that are making LEED mandatory, but it's really tiny. The rest is really privately driven. So it's consumers that are demanding this certification, demanding hotels to be LEED certified, and they won't stay if they don't have an environmental policy in a certain hotel. Yes, I mean, the commercial sector is obviously the one that's driving it. The retail sector and the hospitality sector are rapidly expanding and in very close second. Residential sector, we're barely seeing anything at all at the moment. Very, very, very little. Yes, there is obviously the Hong Kong BEAM system, and then there's the China 3-star system. And you can look at it in a way that they are competing, and many people like to talk about the competition because that's sexier to talk about. But really, they're very integrative. They all integrate very well with each other. So while they might not necessarily get along with each other, what we're seeing is that developers are doing both certifications. We have projects here in Hong Kong that are doing LEED and BEAM, and it's completely fine. We have projects in China. Most of the ones in China are doing 3-star and LEED because the BEAM system, the 3-star system, complies with the local regulations. Here you get an extra 10% of GFA. In China, you have up to 80 RMB per square meter subsidies for a 3-star certification, but they don't give you the global brand that LEED does. So developers are choosing both.
Thanks, Alejandro. My question is for Robin. So I would like to know from you what exactly are the challenges that FoodLink is facing right now? And since your operation, how much of poverty do you think that FoodLink has helped improve?
How much
of poverty, of hunger that you have felt fit?
I think the greatest challenge actually for us right now is, I think Alex touched upon this as well, is legislation. Hong Kong, we're very behind in terms of our legislation. In places like the US, Canada, Australia, there exists a law called the Good Samaritan legislation, and that protects food donors from liability when they're donating food in good faith to charities. Now, that law does not exist in Hong Kong. And so a lot of hotels that we used to approach or restaurants and clubs and canteens and supermarkets, they've said no to donating food to us, and they would rather throw it out and dump water on it because they didn't want it to be resold than to donate the food to people in need. So, you know, I think without legislation in place, we do the best that we can, and we've come up with our own model, but that's still not enough. So, you know, we're working with policy makers right now and trying to push legislation through, but it's Hong Kong, might take longer than we would like. But in terms of poverty alleviation, you know, with Foodlink, what we do is we alleviate hunger. We don't solve it. Issues like hunger and poverty, these are issues that are very difficult to solve, but it doesn't mean that you don't do anything about it. And I guess a good analogy would be, let's say a kid fell into a pool. Would you save the child from drowning? Or would you stand back and say, oh, hold on, you know, all kids in this neighborhood should learn how to swim. We need to put up barriers around the swimming pool, and there needs to be lifeguard on duty all the time. It does, you know, those are policies and those are necessary as well. But at the same time, you are still going to jump in and save that kid from drowning. So, you know, we do what we can, and given the context that we live in.
Hi. In your presentation, you have mentioned that in other countries, there are companies like Foodlink, and they mostly bring food in the shape of bread only, right? And you have expanded this to warm meals. Do you think?
Hot food, yeah.
Yes. Do you think about expanding to other countries or helping other companies or other organizations in other countries to do the same thing? Because hunger is everywhere.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, Hong Kong's relatively easy because, you know, we're lucky because Hong Kong's small. And so we have size to our advantage. So when we actually pick up the food and we deliver it, we can do it very quickly and very efficiently. You know, we're delivering food within the hour from pickup. So, you know, if you're in places like Bali, you know, you're going to be stuck there forever. You know, no one's ever going to get the food. So we're fortunate enough to do that. But right now we're actually putting together our best practice guidelines in terms of our operations, so it can be replicated regionally for our model to work, because it's so simple. All you have to do is you're picking up surplus food and you're giving it to those in need. So it's a very, very simple and very replicable model. But because you're dealing with food, the strictest food and safety guidelines have to be put in place, and people have to know how to handle the food properly.
Thank you.
Hello, Robin. My question is how do you make money by, you know, how do you make profits?
Well, we're a nonprofit, so we don't make profit. We don't make profit. So we rely very heavily on donors for our operations and operating costs. You know, it costs $5.30 to provide a meal through Foodlink, which is actually very insubstantial. But we rely very heavily on donors for all our funding needs.
Okay, so but you have 5 staff, right? In your company, how do you feed them? You know, how do you run a company? But you can't.
Well, we have to fundraise, and part of fundraising will go to overheads and admin costs. So 3 of those staff are drivers, and they're the ones actually doing the heavy lifting and picking up the food and donating it. So, so our fundraising events and initiatives help fund our staffing costs. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, good evening. You mentioned about the difficulty in obtaining permission to carry out renovations or changes in buildings and structures that you purchase. How would you quantify the origins of these? Do you think it's simply bureaucracy, culture, competition with big developers, and so on?
I think that's a very good question. I haven't been in this industry that very long, and all I can tell you is about my first-hand experience. And as I said in the presentation, I think a lot of it is the way that the building department is structured. and no one wants to put a bad foot forward in case they lose their jobs. So if you're doing something a little bit unique or original, and it's outside of the scope, it needs to go to a planning committee, it needs to go to every single government department, and it takes time. And that's why a lot of developers don't do anything unique, because even for them, it takes a lot of time to build something different, and time, as we all know, is money. So, that's one of the, again, obstacles to doing that.
Yes. This question is for Alexandra. You mentioned a while ago that at the last of your slide that you're looking at different global market. Since you have been developing things at Sri Lanka, right? And do you agree that actually it gives more social impact and brings more profit from global market? And what is your view? And actually, what is your view of basing in Hong Kong?
Do I think there's more profit if I go overseas? Is that the question?
No. The question is, what is your current view of basing in Hong Kong?
Well, Dinesh and I were born in Hong Kong, so for us it's home. That's one thing.
Yes.
The other thing is that Hong Kong is an incredibly good place to do business. There's no doubt about it. Setting up companies here, the rule of law, the transparency. Besides the building department, everything else is great. No, it's yeah, fine. Hong Kong's a great base. So we do travel a lot to Sri Lanka because we do have a project there. And it gives us a good base and a good place to run our business from for projects that we look around the region.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question about the green building. We can find a lot of research about the green premium for the office building to incorporate those green design in it. But we can seldom find something related to the residential sector. Could you tell me the reason why?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I'm seeing that as well. I mean, in this part of the world, it's true. The residential sector is the one that has not been adopting the green building aspects, because I don't think that the consumer base is ready for it, and they're not asking for those types of certifications. Also, there is a limited amount that you can do in terms of a high-rise building when you're doing a retrofit, right, as opposed to a home. So if you compare the market here to the US has a very strong green building residential sector. There's a specific LEED system called LEED for Homes, but it's a home, not an apartment. So there's a lot of, construction